Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Hope y'all had a wonderful holiday season and 2021 is starting off right for you. I had a great break with friends and family in the holiday season, had some fun times, but I'm excited to be back with all new episodes starting out with this one today. And I want to say thank you for all of you for listening in 2020 and making the show awesome. Please keep listening. Please keep downloading and sharing with all your family and friends. We have lots of amazing guests coming up for you and some other exciting things in 2021. If you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, head on over to Facebook and join the Unseen Paranormal Podcast Lounge. We got all kinds of different things paranormal on there. You can post your own paranormal stories, your own paranormal news, stuff that you find. And also you can find out what's going on with the show all the time and see what's coming up next week and so on and so forth. So without any further ado, let's get to our amazing guest today. Enjoy the show. Today, we have a great guest for you. Natalie Fowler is a psychic medium, paranormal investigator, and author of several books, including Monsters of the Midwest, Night Visions, and her newest book, The Spirit's Way Home, Inspiring Stories from a Psychic Medium. In The Spirit's Way Home, Natalie recounts her journey helping spirits find peace, cross over, and tell their fascinating stories. You can find this incredible book and all her books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or her website, nataliefowler.com. Welcome to the show, Natalie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What was your first paranormal experience and how did you get into being a medium?
That's quite a loaded question, actually. I think, though, that I would have to trace back my first paranormal experience to when I was a really little girl. My mom actually tells a story about how when I was a little girl, I had an imaginary friend, and her name was Darnie. And I think I was about 3 or 4, and Darnie used to go with me everywhere. And then one day, I suddenly stopped talking about her, and my mom asked me where she had gone. And it turns out that I explained that Darnie had died of a heart attack and needed to go and wasn't able to play with me anymore. So this was kind of a story that survived through the years. And as I started to get more interested in the paranormal and do my own research for some of my fictional characters, I kept coming across the fact that a lot of times little kids have imaginary friends that are actually ghosts. Kids that have some of these psychic abilities are actually interacting with ghosts and spirits. And so I asked her again and again, is it possible that I could have been playing with a ghost? And she would always say no and deny it. And finally, last year, I got her to admit that she and my grandmother actually had a conversation about the fact that I was probably playing with a ghost, but they had no idea what to do about that, so they just pretended it wasn't happening. So that was probably my very first paranormal experience. But then, going through the years, when I was young, I was fascinated by ghost stories. I was always the kid at the campfire that was curious and interested in hearing stories, and it wasn't necessarily that I was particularly brave or anything, but I just had a curiosity about the other side and wanting to know what that was like. And I think what I was always looking for in a ghost story, I couldn't actually find. I wanted to know more about why the ghosts were stuck and what was causing them to stay behind if they were supposed to be going somewhere else. And so I always just approached it with that curiosity and I guess compassion. And as I got further along, my life ended up taking a very practical route, and I went to undergrad for business, and I ended up going on to law school, and I kind of thrived in that environment. I really like research and writing and proving things with facts and all of that. And then I later went on and became a practicing attorney, and turns out that I actually wasn't very good at it. I'm much happier behind a stack of books than I am arguing with other people. And it turns out part of that was because I'm a huge empath and I didn't know it at the time. So I was just really overwhelmed by all that angsty energy. So I ended up in publishing, and as I got back into the writing world and the publishing world, I had an idea for a creative story that kind of blended both of those sides of me together, in that I created a fictional character who was trained to think logically and rationally like a lawyer, which totally fit my analytical side. And then I thought I would give her something completely irrational to deal with, like a ghost, which also started to satisfy that need for me to explain what was happening on the other side. and write the story that I'd always been looking for when I was a little girl. And so I just started actually diving into the paranormal through my creative work. And in that found a group of paranormal investigators called Ghost Stories, Inc. They had invited me to come along on a paranormal investigation. And here I had been writing about ghosts for 10 years, but I didn't know if I really wanted to go shake one out of an attic for myself. And I went along, and because I didn't want to look stupid, doing something that I had never done before, I had actually spent a good deal of time at the library investigating some of the locations that we would be at doing our ghost hunt. And I ended up finding some really great stuff, and it turns out they really liked what I found, so they ended up asking me to be part of the group as their researcher and historian. So it all kind of fit together really well. And then as I went on more and more adventures with them, realized that as I was going into these dark haunted houses and properties, I was actually seeing and sensing and feeling a lot more than anybody else was. It was about that time that I learned I actually had a lot of these gifts myself that were unfolding, and I figured I'd better figure out what to do with that and why that was happening. So that kind of started my exploration into my own psychic abilities and gifts. And now here I am. I am seeing my own clients and all of that. And if you had told me 20 years ago that this is what my life would end up being, I would never have believed you.
Yeah, you've had quite the journey, and you kind of gave a quick synopsis, but in the book you go into a lot more detail about your beginnings and developing your gift and that type of stuff.
Yes, it was quite an evolution, and I think one of the things that I like about how the book came together was that you really see like a lot of when started having some of these experiences happening to me, I really approached it with a very logical, analytical brain in that attempt to kind of prove to myself I wasn't making this up, because I'm also a very creative person, obviously, if I'm writing fictional stories for myself. So I was constantly taking an analytical approach to it. And I think that also comes from starting out in this field as a paranormal investigator first before I was a practicing psychic. So I like how my analytical brain serves me when I'm in these different situations.
Yeah, and like you said, you do readings for people as well.
Yep.
But you kind of one of the biggest focuses that you've had is helping spirits move on.
Yeah.
And kind of focused on that. I've had a couple other psychics on the show so far, and their focus has been more, helping people. Helping the dead in at the same time, but more of like doing readings and doing, big gallery readings and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And with this book, you kind of focus, it shows that you've kind of focused more on the medium part of it, of actually helping dead people at these different locations.
Yes, definitely. That's actually how I came into my work as a psychic. I started out with a service where I just was really passionate about not only clearing space for people, because I don't think that anybody should be afraid to be in their own home, but also approaching the ghost side of things with an idea of spirit rescue, because I had a colleague say those words to me once, and that became really important to me. And it really tapped into where I came from in all of this, that curiosity and the empathy for that stuck soul, and where are they supposed to be, and how do you help them get there if they're not where they're supposed to be?
Yeah, and I think I've been a paranormal investigator researcher for many, many years, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of paranormal groups are missing, that they don't know how. They want to get into helping people, a lot of them, but they don't know what to do about the spirit rescue part of it.
Yep.
Of, why are the spirits doing what they're doing, and do they want to move on? And that's where somebody like you steps in, and you can help them move on if they want to, or figure out, what's going on and why are they acting out, or what the deal is.
Exactly. And actually that's what prompted me to start and co-found my own group. I was part of Ghost Stories Inc., and I'm still part of Ghost Stories Inc., but they take a much more creative approach to things, with the idea that if you're going to be writing about fictional characters that are experiencing haunted activity, go put yourself in that situation to feel what they feel and bring your writing to a deeper level. And while that of course is great for my writing craft, I really wanted to do more with helping both the homeowners and the spirit side of things. So in this world, as a paranormal investigator, there's a lot of interaction between different groups, and you're going to all the different events and conventions and meeting up with each other and getting to kind of that networking group. So as we were doing all these different events all over the place, I just really found a great group of people that also shared a similar passion for that spirit rescue side. So we co-founded a group called Paranormal Services Cooperative, in that really promotes that spirit rescue side of things. and also helps kind of promote paranormal unity, because we all, as paranormal investigators, we all have a lot of information that we're getting on a regular basis, and we're all better if we start sharing that together and kind of help each other. How do you process how to handle some of these different cases, and not just help the homeowner, but also the spirit in that. So.
Yeah, and I've talked about it on the show with quite a few guests. I've always taken an approach that, every haunting, if it's not residual energy, if it's an active, intelligent spirit, then they were once people too. So
yes.
You need to approach it in that way and in a respectful manner in that way as well.
Yes. Yes. And also I think curb some of the fear, because so much of what we see on TV focuses on the fear side of things, and it doesn't have to be something we're afraid of once we start to understand what's going on. And I do a lot of work with kids. So much of what I've done in my own professional development has been about staying a couple steps ahead of my very psychic children. And so, and a lot of the homeowners that help or that seek me out are people who have kids who are sensitive to energies. And I think that's happening more and more. Part of that is because the veils are shifting and they're thinner than they ever have been. But also, I think kids these days are being born with gifts at an exponential rate as well. So got a lot of kids that maybe are experiencing and sensing more than maybe their parents might have thought was there. And so that's part of that too, is just being passionate about helping kids not be so afraid of this stuff.
Right. With the fact that this is once a person as well, and they're just in a different plane, and to not be afraid of that, and to not be afraid of the gifts. I think you come from the same generation I do. I think we're around the same age, and I think our generation and the older generations, I've talked about this on the show as well with other guests about it being taught out of you.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, your grandmother and your mom didn't know how to deal with it, so they just kind of brushed it under the carpet a little bit. So I think that has a lot to do with it too, is that we have much more open society with all the ghost hunting shows that have been around for years now, and people are more willing to talk about it, and people are more willing to be honest about their gifts, and you don't have as many parents kind of doing that, sweeping under the rug. They want to foster those gifts and tell their kids, you're not crazy. This is really happening. This is something that's real.
Yes, absolutely. And we definitely have the mainstream, all the paranormal shows on television that have helped push that understanding a little bit further along. I grew up Catholic, so I come from a very religious background, and depending on what religious beliefs you were raised in, when you come from that religious upbringing, there's a lot of judgment about that, or specific ideas about what tapping into those gifts. That's part of it. I think we're seeing that shift, though, to be much more understanding. The more and more I kind of opened up about what was happening with me, the more and more people came to me and said, oh, this is what happened. Everyone seems to have a closet ghost story that they want to tell you when you start to share what you do.
Yeah, and like you were saying with the religious aspect, I live in the Bible Belt, from the Bible Belt in Tennessee, and so I kind of understand where you're coming from with different factions of Christianity and other religions, all these different beliefs, and some of them are more open to the spirit world than others. And so, yeah, there's kind of a shift in that belief as well, with I think not as many people being as religious and that type of stuff. And so with the ghost shows on top of that, I think the ghost shows are kind of a double-edged sword, though. I think it makes the culture more open to talk about it, but then you have what I've noticed a lot of people, especially in the investigating arena, you have a lot of homeowners who are scared because they see on TV shows it's all demonic, and from some of the TV shows and that type of stuff. So it's good to have people like you out there trying to dispel those myths and those rumors and trying to help the spirits along.
Yes, and I think that double-edged sword can also go into the world of paranormal investigators too. I think there's a lot of groups going out there and trying to kind of simulate what they see on television, and there's so many more layers to it than what we're actually shown on television. So yeah, it's great to have the depth where you've got shows like yours that explore and kind of dive a little bit deeper into it to give everyone kind of a more solid understanding of what's going on beyond what you just see on TV.
Yeah, and I try to be, completely honest with people. Like, what you see on TV is not what really happens when you're actually investigating. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of research, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff.
And it's a lot more boring.
Yeah, they film for a week just to get enough to put in a 45-minute show.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a lot. It's dealing with people, and it's dealing with, like I said, the research, and then you got hours of evidence to go through just to get maybe if you're lucky, a few EVPs, or if you're really lucky, like a full body apparition or something.
Yes. Yes. And then catch it on camera on top of that. Because that's the other trick is you might actually see something like that and the camera's pointing the wrong way.
Right. Or you're not, or you're changing batteries or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But going back to the book, there's a couple of locations that you kind of center around a lot of your experiences and a lot of the help that you've given to some of the spirits. One of them is the Palmer House Hotel.
Yes, that's my home away from home. The Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota is a hotel that's been operating as a hotel actually for its entire existence, which I think is one of the only hotels in Minnesota to be able to claim that. But it was built in the early 1900s by the Palmer family who wanted a destination hotel away from the city. So it was one of the first hotels in the area to have electricity and indoor plumbing and all of those finer things that now we take for granted. But yes, and it's got quite the reputation for being a haunted hotel. It's been featured on Ghost Adventures and more recently on the Dead Files. So there's a lot of stories that come from the Palmer House Hotel.
And so how did you come to go to the Palmer House Hotel and start helping the spirits there?
Yes. Well, let's see. I first went to an event there as part of the Ghost Stories Inc. group. We were doing a workshop weekend where we were teaching writing classes and art classes, which of course we conducted in the basement of the Palmer House because that's a lot more exciting than talking about writing and art upstairs in the lobby. But so we had a whole weekend put together, and on Saturday night then we would do a paranormal investigation and take everyone through for a ghost hunt as part of our event. And so I started going with that group. That was actually my first paranormal. I mean, I've had other paranormal experiences throughout my life, but my first paranormal experience at the Palmer House was the very first night that I slept there. I woke up the next morning, and this was before I was really identifying with my own psychic gifts. I was still more in the talking myself out of this is actually something happening side of things. And I woke up in the morning and there was a little boy holding my hand. And, I felt like someone was holding my hand and I felt like a little boy. But of course, in my logic brain, I was talking myself out of that. And just as I was about to open my eyes and say, no, it's just my imagination, then I felt him grab my hand. I had the first moment I woke up, I felt like he was watching me. And then eventually he grabbed my hand and kind of went through, you kind of almost have to talk yourself out of it if you don't know where to go with that. So, yeah. And I didn't know where to go with that. But now looking back, I know that was actually something that did happen. And, I don't even know if I shared it with anyone else because I wasn't sure what to even share with it. But that was one of my first experiences there. And then they also have a lot of events with other metaphysical practitioners that would come in. And one of the weekends that I ended up attending was a psychic development weekend. And I went with my mom. It was a really fun mother-daughter weekend. And we did kind of a crash course psychic development class that went through the whole weekend that also included a ghost hunt. And that was just a different way to kind of explore the hotel than the first event I had gone to there. And then it just became a place where I spent a lot of time. There are a lot of television shows that would do events there. And when those happen, we need to have a lot of helpers up there. So I started going up to help with different events for different things. And as a paranormal investigator that investigates there regularly, you sort of develop a rapport with the energies there and the ghosts that are there. So they're more likely to come out and interact with us if you have some regular people there that are familiar with the hotel, and just kind of making sure everything runs smoothly. There are a lot of rules about investigations there. Kelly Freeze, the owner, works really hard to make sure that it stays a safe place for people to investigate. So there are a lot of requirements about who can come in and investigate and where you can go in the hotel. So when those bigger events happen, we have a lot of people on standby to help with all of that. So that's kind of how I started going up there. And then that evolved. I believe that at the Palmer House Hotel, there are a lot of energies there who are supposed to be there. They've chosen not to go for whatever reason. And I think part of that is they're teaching us. They're there to help us understand the paranormal a little bit better, which is why you have some of the regular ghosts that stay there, and they know that they can go on if they want to. Most of them have chosen not to. I believe that we have free will choice in death as we do in life. So they've chosen to stay behind for whatever reason, for the moment or for the time being. But there are also, when you have a bunch of investigators coming in or different people coming in to investigate, that also has the potential to open the door into some other things that maybe shouldn't be there. So there are several of us work kind of behind the scenes to help make sure that the hotel stays safe and the energies there stay safe. And I often joke that I'm one of the other cleaning ladies at the hotel. So there have been times where something's off or something's happening, or it becomes clear that there's an energy there that's not supposed to be there. And I do a lot of work behind the scenes to help whatever that might be. So there are a lot of those stories in the book, actually, about those specific moments.
Yeah, and so you were talking about how some of the spirits have chosen to stay, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about mediums, especially mediums that do what you do by helping spirits cross over. You don't automatically just go into a location and just clear everybody out.
No.
Like, you actually interact with them and find out, why they're staying, if they want to stay or go, and they have an option.
Yeah, I kind of have a code of ethics that I follow with all of that. I never work on a house or a property without consent from the homeowner. I could walk down, I live in St. Paul, and Summit Avenue is a street in St. Paul with lots of old mansions, and I could walk down the street and be able to tell you which ones are haunted and maybe even get some of the ghost stories that go there, but I would never work on those houses without consent of the homeowners, because that's not my place. However, if something were to follow me home and end up in my space, then that's fair game. And then I know that I have permission to cross it over or help it out if it needs it. But I don't ever do any work on any of those properties without consent from the owners or the managers of the space.
And how do you talk to the spirits? Because I know different psychics have different ways that they communicate with clairaudience and with seeing and just getting messages and different stuff like that. How do you get messages from the spirits?
Yeah, I would say that when I'm doing work like that, my strongest of my clair gifts is my claircognizance, and it actually was really hard to put my finger on when I was figuring out how all this worked for me. And there's a lot of that discussion in the book about how I kind of started to piece together these different gifts and how they worked for me, because they work differently for everyone. And I really struggled with that in the beginning, because I would take classes from different psychics or different practitioners and get really worried and concerned that my gifts weren't working exactly like someone else's. And then I finally realized, everybody's gifts work differently, and you have to figure out how they work for you specifically. So for me, my strongest gift is claircognizance, and the way that information usually comes in is kind of in a download. Claircognizance is that gut feeling, like I just get a gut feeling that something is one way or another. But as I developed that more, I would actually get more information coming in with that. So the best way to describe it is almost like someone sticks a flash drive in me and I just get a whole story download dump all at once. So, a lot of times that download comes with the reasons a ghost doesn't want to go to where they are supposed to, or what their beliefs are about what heaven is. And then oftentimes I'll also get information about what they need to see in order to feel better about going to the other side and crossing over. So that's really kind of how it works.
Yeah, and like I said, there's different ways. So claircognizance is just kind of knowing the stuff, like you're saying that ESP that people are familiar with, and just kind of knowing the things.
It's an inner knowing. Yeah, it's just I just know because I know it, and there's no real tangible way to say how. It actually makes me really hard to be married to, because I'll argue to the death about something I know and my gut is right. But I don't always have, it doesn't come in with the vision or the voice telling me that. So it's harder to kind of put your finger on what it is. I just feel it in a different place in my body. And that's actually how I started to discern what it was. I realized the information was resonating more from my gut and my solar plexus rather than my logical brain. And then now that I've developed some of my other gifts, I can use them all to work together to kind of validate that. And now often the other information will come along as well too. My clairvoyance works most strongly in my mind's eye. And sometimes my clairaudience comes in my own voice. we all have that self-talk that goes on in our head throughout the day. And I realized that when I started arguing with myself about different things, that I was actually getting psychic information coming in through that clairaudience, which was kind of funny to realize. I often go through the grocery store and I don't shop with a list. I'll just hear the different things that I need. And one day I started arguing with myself about what I needed. And then I realized, wait a minute, this can't be coming from me if I'm arguing with myself. It was kind of funny. So now I've learned to just listen to that voice, even if I don't always agree with it. And 9 times out of 10, it's right on about whatever reason or whatever it is. So, when I'm helping a lost soul or a ghost in a property, I'll use all of those things and get the story download, and then I'll use, oftentimes now that'll come with a vision or an image of something, maybe what I need to help them with, an image of either like a bubble. I had one ghost who I actually was kind of stumped on what they needed to see, and so I just out of nowhere kind of said, I'm just going to wrap you up in a bubble, and and she got really excited and said, oh, like Glenda the Good Witch from Wizard of Oz. And I was like, yeah, so I guess. And so it was kind of funny because I hit on exactly what she needed without knowing that that's what she needed. And she must have been from that generation that watched the Wizard of Oz on TV back in the day. And she was really excited to go to heaven in a Glenda the Good Witch bubble. So that's what she got. Other ghosts have wanted staircases and different things. And so that's usually when my clairvoyance will show me what they need to see in order to go on.
Back to the show right after this.
Hello and welcome to What Goes Bump in the Night. I'm your host, Trevor Jensen, and with me is
Riley Clark.
And on this podcast, we explore everything spooky, extraterrestrial, unexplained, and supernatural,
Bringing you our own personal experiences from our guests, creepy stories.
So join us around the campfire, or for just a Riley and Trev talk where we talk about any topic that we feel is relevant to anything that day. And you could also just come for these creepypastas that we find on these forums.
So join us around the campfire and find out what really goes
bump in the night.
And now, back to the show. And there's some interesting spirits of the Palmer that you write about and how they kind of get the attention of the owner, and then the owner kind of calls you to come in and try to figure out what's going on.
Yes. So there's one ghost specifically in the kitchen, and she likes to push the mixing bowls off the freezer whenever anything is off in the kitchen. And it can be very startling if you're not expecting the big metal mixing bowls to come crashing down. So she scared quite a number of people, but really she's just trying to help. And the very first time this happened, the mixing bowls came crashing off the freezer, and there were 2 waitresses that had actually, who never claimed to see ghosts or have any paranormal stories, had actually both reported seeing a dark shadow pacing back and forth across the oven in the kitchen, like that galley in the kitchen where the cooks work. So Kelly reached out to me and asked me to tune in and see if I could pick up on anything. And what I picked up on was that there were actually 2 different things happening. And one was the ghost who was trying to help alert us that there was someone there that shouldn't be there. The other was this energy that the download story that I got with this was that it was a guy who had died. He seemed like he was from the area, and it felt like he had died in an ATV or a snowmobile accident of some kind, and it felt like there was probably alcohol involved, and he was really, really angry. He was really upset that he had died, and the story that came in with that was that he had left behind either a girlfriend or a fiance who was pregnant and expecting their first baby, and he felt really stupid that he had gotten himself killed and left her alone to take care of this baby, and he was angry about that, and that anger caused him to kind of miss his opportunity to cross over at the time he died. So when he got stuck, he didn't know where to go, but somehow he knew that the Palmer House Hotel was haunted. It felt like he maybe had a connection from someone who had worked there in the past and knew that it was haunted. But the funny part was that he was afraid of ghosts. So he didn't go further past. He came in through the back door, and he didn't leave that 4 feet stretch that walks across that goes along the galley of the kitchen. And so he was just pacing back and forth that whole time. And as I'm tuning into this, I started asking him questions, and I said, you know, I understand that you're upset, but how are you going to help her from the kitchen of the Palmer house? If you go to where you're supposed to go, then you can be a higher vibration, and you can actually come back and help your girlfriend with the baby. You can't do that from the kitchen of the Palmer house. And he just kept pacing back and forth. And it was kind of funny because I realized I was kind of cross-examining him, and I was using some of the skills that I had learned in law school and when I was questioning witnesses. And here I was thinking in the back of my head, like, I'm cross-examining a ghost into going where he's supposed to go. And I don't know that I'm going to be including this in the alumni update anytime soon. But he was going back and forth, and I just was struggling with that. And I had previously, the very first spirit I had ever helped cross over was a guy from the 70s who had wanted that he showed up to me, and that's all he said was, I want a stairway to heaven like the song. And when he asked that, a stairway dropped out of the sky, and he started walking up the stairs. And it's a really long song, so it took a really long time. But that was the very first time I ever helped kind of a stranger cross over, someone I didn't know. And so now, you know, I'm in the kitchen of the Palmer house, and I asked him, you know, do you want a stairway to heaven like the song? He looked at me, he finally stopped pacing, and he looked at me and he goes, that's really stupid. Okay. And it was kind of a good moment for me, because I realized if I was making this up, it would work the same way every time, and a ghost wouldn't tell me that my idea was stupid.
Right.
So
right.
it was kind of a good validation moment for me. So then I just kept going into different things. I asked him, you know, because he had died on a snowmobile, I asked him if he wanted to go to heaven on a snowmobile. And instead of answering, I just got this image in my head of a really beautiful Harley Davidson motorcycle. So I said, do you want to go to heaven on a Harley? And I said, okay, you can do that, but you have to actually drive it there. And I'm going to send a friend of mine along to make sure you get to where you're supposed to go. And when you get there, you get to keep it. So we walked out the back door of the Palmer house together, and there was this beautiful Harley Davidson motorcycle sitting there. And one of my guides was on another motorcycle, and together they rode off to heaven on a Harley. So that was pretty bizarre. But
throughout the book, through the different stories that you tell, I found it really fascinating, all the different spirits, because based on their lives and even their beliefs in life, how you help them get to the other side, because they're all different. Because like you were saying, the guy in the 70s, it was Stairway to Heaven because of the song, and this guy obviously was like a motorcycle, snowmobile guy. Yeah, I just find that really interesting, depending on the time that they passed away and, you know, their lives and all that.
Yeah. And kind of part of that is what their belief system is. Like you said, if they had an idea in their head of what heaven was, and if that doesn't really feel like somewhere they want to go, they're not going to go there. And there was one guy I helped when he died. His wife actually showed up to get him to help him cross over, and he didn't like his wife very much when they were alive. And so he said, no thanks, I'm going to stay here. And, you know, in his mind, heaven was all about singing in the choir and going to church all day, and he didn't want to have anything to do with that. He thought, you know, that would be a boring way to spend his afterlife. And for that ghost, it was more a matter of just explaining to him that heaven didn't have to be like that. Heaven can be whatever you want it to be. If you want to be a gardener all day, then that's what you get to do in heaven. And that helped him kind of wrap his head around it being okay to go where he was supposed to go all along.
And there's another place in your book that kind of, along with the Palmer Hotel, kind of takes center stage. Isn't that Four Paws Restaurant?
Yeah. So Four Paws Restaurant is a really kind of fancy restaurant in St. Paul. They closed about a year ago now, just prior. Well, I guess it was a little bit before COVID. We're hoping and crossing our fingers that they open up again at some point. But it's a really beautiful old mansion that was built back when St. Paul was kind of a booming town in the early days. And that neighborhood specifically was one of the wealthier neighborhoods. And it had the governor's mansion. The original governor's mansion was right across the street. And, you know, it didn't take long, though, for the homeowners to start moving out a little bit, and Summit Avenue was developed not long after that. So anyone who had a property, even the governor's mansion, moved up to Summit Avenue. And so this whole kind of neighborhood, it's the Irving Park neighborhood, kind of fell into disrepair because all these wealthy homeowners moved up and then they left these big houses behind. And Four Paws is just, it's got this really rich history, and there were these stories that had survived through the years. There was the original owner, Joseph Forepaugh, built this home, and it was a great lavish property. The rumor is that he actually ended up having an affair with the maid named Molly, and she became pregnant with his baby, ended up committing suicide in the house. And there are all these really gruesome stories about how that happened. One story claimed that she flung her body out the window from a light fixture on the third floor. And another story said that she hung herself from the chandelier on the third floor, and different things. But there was kind of an agreement on where it happened in the house, but the details had kind of evolved into whatever they evolved into through the years. And so this was a very notoriously haunted property. And I remember, actually, it's where we went to celebrate my law school graduation dinner way back when I graduated from law school. I guess not way back, but a while ago. And I remember being excited to go there, hoping that I would catch a glimpse of this. And this was before I knew I could do any of this or had an interest in becoming a paranormal investigator. And, you know, but it was just those stories had survived through the years. And we got to work with the staff. We ended up doing a book signing there for our Night Visions book. And for a while, the management wasn't allowed to talk about ghosts, and the owners didn't want anybody to talk about it or any of that. So, but we had done a book signing there. We were able to get in to do a book signing there, and they kind of saw how you could do this in a really classy way. So we would do different investigations, paranormal investigations with different teams of people. And then we would put together a presentation dinner so that, you know, they couldn't exactly have all these people coming and traipsing through investigating themselves. And their clientele was really interested in hearing the stories, but not necessarily interested in going and doing it for themselves. So we would put together different presentations about some of the evidence that we'd found and the different stories that we'd uncovered and all of this. So it was just a lot of fun, and we got to know the energies there really well. And there are a lot of those stories in the book as well.
Yeah, those two locations are really interesting, and like you said, there's lots of stories about them. I really enjoyed the book. Lots of great stories in there, and a lot of the paranormal books, they kind of get into, I don't want to say creepy territory, but a lot of them I don't know if they try to do that, but your book stays kind of lighthearted, and it's a really good read in that way, of that it's not like spooky ghost stories, you know, type stuff. It's more about your life and living with this gift and learning how to use it, but also helping spirits and kind of telling their stories as well.
Yes, that's actually exactly the approach I wanted to take. I really wanted it to be about them and their stories, because that's always what I was looking for in a ghost story book, is why did a ghost decide that they were going to stay here instead, or how did that even happen? And it's really what I wanted to bring out and kind of come up with a different way to tell a ghost story based on, you know, some of these things that have happened to me, and share some of the rich history of these different properties. For example, with Four Paws, you know, everyone knew the rumors from the early days, but there was actually like 75 years of missing history with that house. And we were able to I spent days in the basement research libraries at the Landmark Center, going into the reverse directory lookup and actually piecing together names of people that had lived there, and just being able to share that part of the history with a property like that was just rewarding to me, to be able to help them fill in that backstory and that history. And again, like that's one of the best parts about ghost stories in the first place, is it's a bridge between completely different times. You know, you've got a ghost from the 1900s existing in the time and space of our life now. And so it's just kind of a fun way to explore it too.
Yeah, and experience the past in a different way, kind of straight from the people themselves, if they're still around.
Exactly.
A lot of psychics will get into, and a lot of paranormal investigators get into the realm of demons and negative spirits and that type of stuff. Have you ever experienced anything that you would consider inhuman or demonic, as people would call it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty loaded question. I guess what I've come to find in my work is that, there are a lot of different realms and dimensions, and some of the things that we're interacting with in the paranormal world can come from that. And I really had to wrap my head around that. Actually, there's a story in the book about Four Paws where there was an energy there that was not human. And I kind of had to step back and think, okay, how am I going to wrap my head around this? And more importantly, how am I going to explain it to the managers? And it didn't feel as evil as I felt before. I've definitely encountered some things that I would say, and it's hard to classify everything as a demon. I think a lot of things that maybe have a darker undercurrent get classified as that aren't necessarily quite that level. So, there's not an exact science to all of this for sure. And there's definitely darker, low vibrational energies. And that's kind of how I think of it is you've got these high vibrations and different layers of things, and that can go dark and down into the lower vibrational energies, but it also can go higher into the angelic vibrational energies, all the way up to the divine. And so you've got all these different layers in between. And I think some of the things that we're interacting with in the paranormal world are from these different layers, and not everything is a ghost energy. I think we can get things from the inner earth energies and all of that. And that's actually the story in the book about Four Paws, is that it was more of an elemental inner earth energy. How do we do that, and how do we start to wrap our heads around that when we're out there investigating? And I think now, especially with the way the energies have shifted, I think the veils are just overlapping more than they ever have before. So we're seeing more, and we're interacting with more from some of those different elemental energies than maybe we did before. My daughter is actually a figure skater, and my husband builds a rink in our backyard every year. And as she's gotten bigger, the rink has gotten smaller and smaller, so she doesn't skate on it a whole lot anymore. But in Minnesota, the rinks recently shut down again, and so that ice rink in the backyard became very important. And her birthday was a couple of weeks ago, and she went out there and she skated on the rink at night. It was the first skate of the year, and she was skating. As she was skating around the rink, I was filming, and there was a green energy that came into the frame, and I was actually getting annoyed with it. I had dropped my camera a couple of weeks ago, my phone, and I thought like there was some weird reflection. So at one point I even grabbed my son's phone to film, and the same anomaly showed up in there, and it was just so bright and so defined that it wasn't like an orb that I've seen. I've seen orbs. I've had orbs show up in pictures before, and I'm always really skeptical about any photo evidence. You always try to debunk it first before you claim that it's anything paranormal. And this energy, though, followed her pattern around the rink in a really obscure way. There was no way it could have been a reflection. I even sent it off to a friend of mine, Kevin Swanson, who is really good at analyzing evidence. And if I'm ever believing something, I'll send it to him to make sure that he can't debunk it before I believe it, because he's really good at breaking apart the different kinds of evidence and being able to debunk stuff. And I sent it to him, and he's like, I got nothing. So that was kind of my key that this was something. And it's fascinating to watch it follow her around the ice and spin. It even spins when she spins, and it didn't feel of this earth. It didn't feel human. It felt a lot more like a fairy energy or an elemental energy that was just having fun. And it just felt a lot stronger than any of the spirit energy I felt. So, and my dad actually recently passed away this summer, and a friend of mine thought, oh, maybe it's your dad coming in for a skate, but it didn't feel like my dad at all. I know what my dad feels like when he shows up, and it wasn't that. It was a lot more playful. It was just a lot more like a fairy. So I don't know.
Yeah. I've talked to some other people who have had that elemental type spirit interaction, and they say the same thing, that it doesn't feel like any spirit they've ever investigated in a house or a location. It's different, and they don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it is different. It's just of a different vibration, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And the more you work with these different energies and the different vibrations, the more you're able to identify when something doesn't fit with what you're used to feeling, I guess.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you about the negative energies like demonic. I say that with air quotes because a lot of
Yeah.
people, from what they see on TV, that's what they automatically go to because, we're some of our experiences. And so,
Exactly.
yeah. And so people think, if something's going on in their house that they perceive as negative, that it's automatically something evil or something demonic.
Yeah, and actually, I actually got a call during the first stay-at-home order back in the spring, and it was a desperate homeowner who had been told by a paranormal team. The paranormal team said, we're not able to come in and investigate, but what you're experiencing is probably demonic. So, but we can't come in because of COVID. And so this homeowner was left just completely shocked, stuck in their home with something they'd been told was demonic, and it really wasn't at all. It ended up being just a really angry ghost that, had followed somebody home and didn't know how to get out of there. So that, it felt really good to be able to help them, but it also just, I think we're really quick to declare that sometimes, and it doesn't, in my experience, that is incredibly rare.
Yeah. And from the other mediums I've talked to, they've said the same thing, and lots of investigators. I've encountered some nasty spirits, but never anything that I would say is demonic or anything like that.
Yeah.
I know some investigators who've been investigating for 40 years, and they'll tell you stories of like, there was this one time that I might have, encountered something demonic, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's few and far between if that's the case. No, most of the time, I mean, if you were angry in life, you're probably not going to be happy that you're dead and stuck, or think you're stuck or whatever. So they act out, and if they don't like what's going on in the house, they might act out as well.
Exactly.
So this book just came out in October, The Spirit's Way Home: Inspiring Stories from a Psychic Medium. What other projects you got in the works?
Oh goodness. Let's see. Well, I've already got an idea for a follow-up book for this. So I'm going to be working on putting some ideas together for a follow-up, which is great. And I'm excited about. I still have some fictional ideas that I've got a couple of books that I've written that are fictional that I want to rework now and try to get those up to a quality that I can get out there and find a home for. But a lot of, and I am excited to get back to my fiction writing, that you just get to tap into a whole different world with that. And a few years ago, I actually started a horror novel that's based on some of the stuff that I've cleared out of the Palmer House Hotel, actually. And I'm really excited about finishing this off. For me, as a writer, it's written itself a little bit differently than usual. It almost plays out like a movie in my head when I'm going to work on it. So maybe there's hopes that it could actually be something more than just a book. So I'm really excited to get that one done. And it's kind of a little bit like Stephen King's The Shining smashes up with Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. So I'm excited to get that one done. But it's hard to find the time to go back and get my brain into a place where I can work on my fiction work like that. But I really want to spend some time doing that this year. And I'm starting to kind of dive into some film stuff too. So there might be more coming with some filming opportunities. So
awesome. And everybody can keep up with you. Your website, nataliefowler.com. You're also on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah.
They can keep up with you there.
Yeah, you can find links to all of that through my website. And
they can find links to your books as well. And like I said, they're available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, and also at Llewellyn Publishers' website.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an awesome conversation. I appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening, and join us next Wednesday for an all-new show. And as always, stay safe out there. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And don't forget to like, review, rate, and share with all your friends. Thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. Listen to our theme song and more of his music at chrislipsmusic.com. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.